In the folds of the northern hills, where the wind seemed to carry forgotten names and the trees bent as though listening for secrets, there lay a village few maps dared to mention. It was not large, nor proud, nor particularly welcoming. It did not shine in the sun, nor gleam in the snow. It sat, half asleep and ever watchful, nestled at the edge of a dense forest known as the Gloaming Wood. The villagers called their home Duskwind Hollow, a name that clung to the tongue like dust and lingered in the mind like the last echo of a prayer long unspoken. Time moved differently in Duskwind Hollow. The sky often remained a shade too gray, even on summer days, and mist wove itself between cottages as if it belonged there. Travelers rarely passed through, and those who did seldom stayed beyond a night. There was something about the air, not heavy exactly but hushed, like the village itself was holding its breath. At the heart of Duskwind Hollow stood an ancient well, crumbling and moss-covered, surrounded by a crooked iron fence that had long since lost its gate. Children were forbidden to play near it, and adults would avert their eyes as they passed. No one ever drew water from it, though the well was said to run deep, deeper than any well in the region, perhaps deeper than any in the known world. They called it the Whispering Well. The name was older than any living soul in the village. It had passed down through generations, sometimes in hushed warnings, other times in grim lullabies meant to keep children in their beds at night. "Don't go near the well," the mothers would say, brushing tangled hair from sleepy brows. "It remembers every voice, even the ones meant to be forgotten." The legend of the Whispering Well was not a singular tale but a tangle of many, like roots curling beneath the earth, each tale different in detail but alike in shape and ending. They told of a girl long ago, left to die in the well by jealous kin. They spoke of a boy who vanished after dropping a silver coin into the darkness and listening too long. They whispered of a widow who came seeking solace and never came out of the fog again. But the most enduring part of the legend, the part that made even grown men shudder as they bolted shutters at dusk, was this: at midnight the well spoke. Some said it spoke in voices that no longer lived. Others claimed it wept like a woman grieving or laughed like a child lost. On moonless nights, villagers swore they heard it whispering their names, soft as breath but sharp enough to cut. Old Madron, the oldest man in the village, often sat on the crooked bench outside the inn and muttered that the well was hungry. He'd seen too much, he said. The hollow had lost too many. When children would ask him why no one filled it in with stones or buried it deep, he'd spit and say, "You don't bury the mouth of a god." Few took him seriously but no one dared try. 100 paces from the well stood the chapel, long since abandoned. Its roof sagged inward like a broken crown, and vines grew thick through its stained-glass windows. The bell in its tower hadn't rung in decades, but it was said that on certain nights, cold ones, still ones, a chime could be heard. 1, 2, 3, 12. Midnight. Always midnight. Some said the well and the chapel were once part of something greater, an order or a cult that had worshipped forgotten deities, drowned gods, or voices from below. But the records had been burned long ago, and those who remembered the truth had taken it to their graves. The villagers followed their own quiet rituals. They hung dried lavender and bundles of rosemary on their doors. They left coins turned heads down on windowsills. Babies born during rainstorms were wrapped in silver-threaded cloth for 7 nights. And no matter what, no one drew near the well after dusk. By day, Duskwind Hollow functioned like any other village. There were cobblers and weavers, farmers and woodcutters. Smoke rose from chimneys. Bread was baked. Chickens clucked. Life went on, slow and circular. But when the sky deepened and the birds grew quiet, the hollow changed. Lanterns burned low and doors were bolted twice. No music played. No footsteps lingered. It was as if the village itself shrank back into the earth to avoid being heard, or worse, answered. Those who had lived in Duskwind Hollow long enough accepted this as the way of things. The well was simply part of the fabric of their lives, a thing to fear quietly and never confront. Outsiders, on the rare occasion they came, often laughed at the villagers' caution, until night fell. Then they too felt it, that oppressive silence. That slow, cold breath rising from the well like a memory waking up. Many left by morning. Only a handful of villagers had dared peer down into the well in recent years. Of them, only one, a drunkard named Bram, spoke openly of what he saw. He claimed the well was bottomless, that its walls were etched with symbols no man had carved. He said he saw a light, dim and blue, flickering far, far below. That night, Bram was found wandering the edge of the Gloaming Wood, naked and crying, his mouth full of mud. He never spoke again. The village healer declared it madness, but others whispered a different word, called. Over time the stories became less frequent but never forgotten. The old kept them alive as did the shadows. And though no one would say it aloud, every villager knew someone who had vanished. A sister, a child, a lover. And though many were declared lost to the woods or the weather, everyone knew where they had truly gone. The well did not take often. But when it did, it took completely. And still it whispered. At midnight, when the moon was high and the wind quieted, if you stood very still in Duskwind Hollow, even far from the square, you might hear it, the faintest murmur like a sigh through old stone. Some said it was only the wind. Others said it was the voices of the dead. But there were always those who claimed they heard something else entirely, something that made their blood run cold and their dreams turn wet and dark. They heard the well call out a name. Not just any name, their own. And so life in Duskwind Hollow carried on, suspended in the strange stillness between the ordinary and the unexplainable. The villagers spoke little, aged quickly and seldom left. The children grew up afraid of deep places and silences. And through it all, the whispering well waited. Not forgotten. Never forgotten. Just biding its time. They called her girl when they spoke to her at all. Most often she was addressed with scorn or silence. Some called her wretch, others drudge, and the cruelest simply hissed through their teeth when she passed, like one might shoo away a stray dog. In a village like Duskwind Hollow, where superstition grew wild as briars, and silence was safer than sympathy, the girl without a name belonged to no one and no one dared belong to her. She was small for her age, pale and thin, with eyes too large for her face and hair the color of damp ash. Her shoulders curved inward, a shape born not of bone but of habit, the habit of shrinking, of vanishing into corners, of bracing for what came next. She moved lightly, soundlessly, as if afraid her own footsteps might offend the earth. Her hands were always red from scrubbing, her fingers cracked from cold and lie. Yet even in her stillness, there was a presence to her, like something quietly listening beneath a frozen lake. The villagers whispered that she had been born under a blood moon, that her mother had died screaming in childbirth, and the midwife who delivered her went blind within the month. Some said she was cursed. Others insisted she was not a girl at all, but a shadow in a girl's shape, something borrowed from the other side. Her stepmother, Marla, never disputed the rumors. She encouraged them if anything. A heavy-jawed woman with hard knuckles and a voice like cracked slate, Marla treated the girl less like a child and more like a servant who never quite earned her keep. She eats more than she's worth, Marla would mutter, loud enough for the neighbors. Stares too long. Doesn't speak right. Odd that one. Odd indeed. The girl was forbidden to speak unless spoken to, but she seldom tried anyway. Not because she lacked words, she had hundreds hoarded like seeds in her mind, but because the few times she had dared to speak freely as a child, she'd been struck across the face, or dragged outside and left barefoot in the snow. Once, when she had been no older than 6, she tried to ask Marla if she had ever known her mother. In response, Marla had dunked her head into the water trough until her limbs went limp and the world went black. Afterward, Marla said she had fallen in. I don't know why you bother with that one, old widow Lentz once told Marla at the market. The gods marked her wrong. Best let her go. I would, Marla muttered, if she didn't keep crawling back. The girl had learned not to run. There was nowhere to go. She was not allowed to attend the village school. She had no kin, no coin, no friends. The few other children avoided her with a practiced dread, as if proximity alone might invite misfortune. Her presence silenced rooms. Mothers clutched their babies when she passed. Even the village priest, who drank more wine than he blessed, once claimed he saw her reflection flicker backward in a bowl of holy water. Her days were filled with chores. Cleaning, sweeping, mending, feeding the hens, washing clothes in the creek until her fingers turned blue. She ate scraps, stale bread, boiled gristle, whatever was left after Marla had fed herself. She slept in the root cellar where the stone walls sweated and the rats crept in pairs. And yet she survived. More than survived. Something in her endured, quietly, like a coal buried deep in snow. She dreamed too. Her dreams were not like others. They came not gently but with a strange, wet pressure, like sinking. Always sinking. She dreamed of water, dark, endless water that shimmered with light not from the sun but from something older. She dreamed of songs sung in no tongue she had ever heard, but which felt familiar, like a lullaby half remembered. She dreamed of names, none of them her own, spoken by voices like wind across stone. Once she awoke with tears on her cheeks and a single word on her lips, Lyriel. She did not know what it meant. In the waking world she never spoke it. But she carried it, hidden deep inside her, a secret, a name-shaped stone that warmed in her chest when she touched it with her thoughts. She didn't dare believe it was hers. Still, she clung to it like a talisman. Sometimes, in the moments between sleep and waking, she would hear a faint sound, like dripping water, echoing somewhere in her mind. And once, just once, she heard her name, not girl, not wretch, whispered in a voice both strange and tender. She sat bolt upright in the dark and whispered back, "Who's there?" But only silence answered. The villagers could not see what grew beneath her quietness, a hunger not for food or warmth, but for truth. Though she had been taught to keep her head down, she watched. She listened. She noticed things others didn't, the way the crows circled the well on cold mornings, or how the shadows near the chapel stretched a second longer than they should. She watched how the mist pooled thickest near the square, how it recoiled from the whispering well even as it blanketed everything else. And she remembered the stories. Not just the ones the villagers told, but the ones she seemed to have always known. Tales of drowned maidens with silver eyes, of voices bound in stone, of the well as a door, not a grave. Her dreams were not dreams, she began to suspect. They were remembrances, not her own but given to her. More and more she felt something waking within her. A stirring. A calling. One afternoon, as she gathered kindling behind the chapel, she found a dead blackbird lying perfectly still atop a stone. Its eyes were wide and glassy, its wings folded neatly at its sides. Around its tiny neck, woven of straw and spider silk, was a thread-thin braid, as if someone had given it a necklace. When she leaned closer, she could hear the faintest hum from the stone below it, like breath caught in a throat. She buried the bird and whispered a farewell in the tongue from her dreams. She didn't know the words, but her mouth knew the shape of them. That night, she dreamed not of drowning but of falling into a sky made of water, where the stars drifted like fish and voices called out her name not in fear or cruelty but reverence. She awoke gasping, heart hammering, a single phrase echoing in her mind. When the water speaks, the silence will break. She didn't understand it, not yet. But it felt important. Like a thread tugging her toward something inevitable. Still, daylight was no kinder. Marla had grown harsher in recent months, her blows less restrained, her glares more venomous. The villagers, too, seemed more tense, as if some unseen pressure had begun to swell in the hollow. There had been strange weather. A cow found dead with its eyes open and dry. A child who stopped speaking after wandering too close to the chapel. And through it all, the whispering well stood silent, but watching. She began to feel drawn to it. Not in the way children are drawn to disobedience, but in the way the tide is drawn to the moon. Something in her yearned for it. She would catch herself pausing as she passed, peering through the crooked fence, trying to see the depths beyond the moss-stained stones. Once she dared place her hand on the stone rim. It was cold, not with the cold of night but the chill of memory. A knowing cold. She did not flinch. Some part of her believed, with a quiet certainty she could not explain, that the well knew her. That it had always known her. That it remembered what the village had tried to erase. She was not just a girl. She had a name, and one day the world would remember it. It began with a dead lamb. One morning, after a night of restless winds and shifting clouds, Marla stormed into the village square with a bloodied cloth in one hand and the weight of accusation in her voice. "The girl," she shouted, wild-eyed and red-faced, "she's cursed the lambs, called death to our doorstep." The villagers gathered slowly as they always did when something went wrong, not because they wanted to be involved, but because fear had a way of drawing them like moths to flame. Marla stood in the center, her arms streaked with red from the animal she'd cradled in death, her eyes scanning the crowd for agreement. "She was in the fields before dawn," Marla said, pointing toward the cottage where the girl crouched, barefoot and confused. "I saw her whispering, fingers in the air like she was drawing symbols. Now my lamb lies cold, split open like some ritual sacrifice." The girl stepped forward timidly, her voice barely audible. "I was gathering wild mint," she said. "You told me to." "Liar." Marla roared. "I saw you with my own eyes. You're a witch just like your mother." The word hit like a hammer. Which, even in Duskwind Hollow, where superstition was worn like a second skin, that word was used sparingly, whispered, not shouted. But Marla had said it aloud, and now it hung in the mist like smoke. Someone in the crowd gasped. Others exchanged glances. It didn't matter that there had been no proof. The villagers had lived on edge for months, children falling ill, the well moaning louder than before, strange dreams and dead birds in doorways. They needed a reason. A vessel for their dread. And now one had been offered to them. By evening the air had shifted. The wind turned sharp. Clouds boiled in from the north. It was the kind of storm that made shutters groan and dogs whimper. Lanterns flickered in the windows as the villagers gathered again, this time not to gossip but to judge. The girl was dragged from the cellar by Marla and two of the stronger men. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She only looked at them hollow-eyed as if the moment had already passed. A small group trailed them through the village, men, women, even children wrapped in shawls. No one spoke. The only sounds were the storm gathering overhead and the girl's bare feet on the mud-wet stones. They brought her to the square. The well stood waiting, silent and slick with moss. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, faster, like the sky itself was grieving. She speaks to things we cannot see, Marla hissed, her hair plastered to her face. She calls voices that aren't meant to answer. She walks like she isn't fully here. You've all felt it. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Eyes dropped. Heads nodded. She poisons the hollow with her presence, said the baker's wife, wringing her hands. Ever since she came of age, the well's gone restless. She makes the crows gather, whispered someone else. I heard her talking to the stones behind the chapel, said another, voice trembling. The girl tried to speak, to say she didn't understand, that she was just herself, not something wicked or strange. But her voice drowned beneath the storm and the growing fury of the crowd. Her lips moved but no one heard. Or they chose not to. Only one person made a sound, old Madron. He hobbled forward, his voice brittle and broken but unmistakably loud. The well remembers her, he rasped. You fools think it's the girl who calls it? No. It's the well calling her back. A few villagers flinched. Some stepped away from him. Marla hissed at him like a feral cat. She's cursed, old man, she snapped. And now she'll return to where she belongs. No trial. No rites. No priest to protest. The chapel had long since fallen silent, and in Duskwind Hollow, old ways overruled law when fear ruled the hour. They bound her hands with twine, rough and wet from the rain. Her dress clung to her knees as she stumbled toward the well, guided, no dragged, by the very hands that had once passed her bread or turned away when she limped by. Please, she said, once voice breaking. Please don't. But the plea was like a feather in the storm, weightless, unheard. A flash of lightning lit the square, revealing the girl's pale face turned upward, hair plastered to her forehead. Her eyes locked with Marla's. I'm not what you say I am, she whispered. Marla spat at her feet. Another flash of lightning. Then thunder, so loud it shook the windows in their frames. And then silence, as if the sky itself was holding breath. The villagers stood in a rough circle, surrounding the well. The girl teetered at the edge, her heels half hanging over the mossy stone. She turned her head, slowly, eyes scanning the crowd. No one met her gaze. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. She was utterly alone. She took one trembling breath. Then hands, Marla's and someone else's, shoved her. She fell. She didn't scream. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was. But she'd spent her whole life falling, from grace, from memory, from affection. This was just the final descent. The darkness swallowed her like a mouth closing. A dull splash echoed from below, far, far below, followed by silence. No one moved. The villagers stood, unmoving, drenched in rain, their breath caught in their throats. Old Madron turned away first. You've done it now, he said. You've given it what it wanted. The rest dispersed in silence. No prayers. No cross drawn. No tears shed. By morning the square had dried. The well stood quiet, undisturbed. Marla claimed she'd done her duty, purged the blight from her home, protected the village. She washed the girl's things, burned her sleeping mat, and salted the cellar floor. No one questioned her. The villagers whispered that the well had fallen quiet. That perhaps the girl had been the cause after all. That peace, however uneasy, had been restored. But not everyone believed it. And even those who did found themselves waking in the night, heart racing, convinced they'd heard something rise from beneath their floorboards, a sigh or a voice, or a single name spoken like a promise. Because the well had always whispered. And now it had a voice to call its own. She fell. Not through air, not through stone, but through something older, deeper, and infinitely vast. The sensation was neither pain nor drowning. It was like sliding through a membrane, a veil between one world and the next. Her body had plunged into the well's black throat. But she had not broken apart, had not gasped for breath or struggled against the dark. Instead she drifted, weightless, breathless, whole. Around her, the silence was thick and alive as though it had its own pulse. And then light. Not sunlight. Not firelight. Something softer, older, a silver-blue glow that shimmered through the murk like moonlight filtered through cloud. She opened her eyes. Not above, There was no above here, but outward in every direction. She was suspended in water, yet she breathed as if through her skin, through her soul. Below her stretched a forest, tall trees with translucent trunks and fronds that swayed slowly in an unseen current. Their branches curled like coral, glowing faintly, shedding drops of light like dew. Strange fish with eyes like stars darted between them, leaving trails of brightness in their wake. Above, or perhaps beside her, ruins drifted, stone columns and broken archways, carved with symbols older than language, half buried in silted sand. Great statues sat in silence, some toppled, some intact, their faces worn smooth, their hands resting on their knees in eternal contemplation. The world was not empty. It hummed. She heard it, not in her ears but within her chest, a low harmonic murmur that vibrated in her bones. It was not music, not exactly, more like memory, as if the place itself remembered her. She reached out a hand. The water shimmered around her fingers but offered no resistance. Beneath her, luminous vines curled through the ruins, blooming into flowers that opened and closed with the rhythm of breath. Small creatures flitted between them, part fish, part flame, trailing sparks in patterns that almost resembled runes. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was home. The water shifted. Not in temperature or color, but in voice. The humming rose, deepened, separated into tones, then syllables, then words. And from the depths, a voice came. Not loud. Not echoing. Intimate. Immediate. Inside her. Liriel. The name bloomed like fire in her chest. Liriel. Again tenderly now with weight. With knowing. She had never heard it spoken aloud, not by another. But she knew it, not just as a name but as a truth. A tether. It was hers. Liriel. Not girl. Not wretch. Not shadow or curse or ghost. She was Liriel. And in that moment, something broke open inside her. A locked door flung wide. Memories not her own but still familiar, unfurled like petals. Women with silver eyes, voices singing beneath water, hands raised to the moon. 1,000 echoes of stories untold, of names erased, now reaching toward her like light through water. She curled inward not from fear, but from awe. The voice came again not from a mouth, not from above or below, but from the water itself. We remember you. You are not lost. You are returned. Liriel tried to speak, but her voice was a thought, a ripple. What is this place? And the answer came not in words but in images and sensation, like a memory given form. This was not death. This was below death. Beyond it, the place beneath forgetting. This was where the unwanted fell, where names unspoken found sanctuary, where sorrow became song. She looked down at her hands. They glowed faintly now, threaded with blue light beneath the skin, as though the water had claimed her not to dissolve her, but to reveal her. She floated downward, gently, slowly, until her bare feet touched the stone floor of the forest. It rippled like light on the surface of a lake, sending shimmering rings outward. And there the vines parted. A path appeared, not in a clearing but within herself. Something guided her, step by step, deeper into the forest of dreams, where voices rose in the currents like the hush of distant bells. She was not afraid, because now she remembered. She was Liriel, and the water had always known her. Liriel moved deeper through the underwater forest, following the shifting path of light the water laid before her. With each step, the pressure around her changed, not heavier but fuller, like she was walking into memory itself. The blue glow deepened into indigo, and the gentle hum of the water gave way to soft voices, layered like song. They did not approach her all at once. Instead, one by one they emerged, not walking or swimming, but drifting into view through arches of coral-like stone, from the trunks of glowing trees, from within the ruins themselves. Each figure shimmered faintly, more essence than flesh, their forms outlined in pale light, their hair flowing like smoke in the water's invisible currents. They were girls. Young women. Some no older than Liriel herself, others full-grown. A few wore simple dresses of old cloth, some draped in faded silks, some in garments no longer seen in the world above. And all of them bore the same quiet light in their eyes, not sorrow, not rage, but recognition. One with raven-dark hair, braided with strands of silver moss, came forward first. Her voice, when she spoke, was like soft water dripping in a cave, slow, steady, and clear. I was called Mirvine. Thrown for dancing under a blood moon, for hearing the river speak. They said I bewitched the men's dreams. I only wanted to sing. Another followed, her eyes the color of moss, her hands cradling a stone doll. They called me Elsha. I spoke to bones, they said, I touched an old book in the chapel. They said my hands were wrong. I was 13. Then another, smaller, with golden curls bound by a ribbon that trailed behind her like a comet. Merit, she whispered. I was lost before I was born. My mother was accused and fled. I never had a name. The well gave me one. They encircled Liriel slowly, not binding her, not trapping her, but welcoming her. Their voices rose and fell like waves, each tale folding into the next, forming a tapestry of old grief and deep power. There were dozens, maybe more. Girls from centuries past, from times when the hollow was still young, when it bore different names, when other kinds of cruelty wore different masks but spoke the same language. Each had been cast into the well. Each had been erased. And each had been remembered, not by the world above but by the water below. They were not spirits in torment. Not ghosts moaning for revenge. They were guardians now. Keepers of the truth. Forgotten daughters turned into watchers of the deep. We do not haunt, Mirvine said. We hold. We do not curse, said Elsha. We remember. We do not rise, Merit whispered. Until you do. The others nodded. Their voices now harmonized, their glow pulsing together like the rhythm of a living heart. You are the last, they told her. The hollow has fed enough. The well has waited. And now, it chooses. Liriel stood at the center of the circle, the light from their bodies reflecting in her skin like moonlight on water. She felt no fear. Only knowing. As if she had been here before, in dreams and echoes. As if their stories were threads woven into her bones from the moment of her birth. A current moved through them, a warm, humming force, and each girl stepped forward, pressing a single hand to Liriel's shoulders, her hands, her brow. With each touch, a new sensation surged into her. Mirvine gave her song. Elsha gave her silence. Merit gave her the memory of her own name spoken with love. Others gave fire, laughter, storm, stillness. Each gift was a piece of something larger. Each one whispered, you are more than one life. You are all of us. And Liriel understood. She was not just a girl cast into a well. She was not just the last to fall. She was the first to rise. It is time, said Mirvine. You will speak for us, said Elsha. You will remember what the world tried to forget, said Merit. The circle widened. The ruins around them pulsed with light as if awakening. From the depths below, a surge of energy lifted Liriel upward, surrounding her in a spiral of shimmering water. Her body rose slowly, hair streaming, arms open, eyes wide and burning with blue fire. And for the first time she did not feel small. She did not feel alone. She was Liriel, daughter of the well, keeper of the forgotten. And she was not finished. Liriel rose from the circle of spirits, their light still warm on her skin. But as she ascended, the water around her darkened. The glow of the underwater forest dimmed, and the voices of the forgotten daughters faded into a distant hush. A silence unlike any she had known settled around her, not absence but anticipation. Then the current shifted. It pulled her sideways, then downward, through a narrow spiral of water that bent the laws of space and breath. The world blurred. Her body became light, then shadow, then form again. And when she finally stilled, she stood not in the forest of glowing trees, but on a stone path suspended in darkness. There was no water here. Or rather, there was water, but it felt like sky. She breathed it, but it offered no comfort. A voice came, not external, but within her ribs. To rise, you must pass through what held you down. The trial had begun. Ahead of her stretched a hall of memory, each arch carved in a different shape. Some jagged, some curved, some burned black, some blooming with spectral moss. The first memory stepped through the nearest arch. It was Marla. But not as she had last seen her, not wild and vengeful in the square. This Marla was younger, stronger, dressed in her finest apron, hair pinned back tight. Her eyes burned with contempt, her mouth twisted in familiar disgust. Wretched little leech, the vision hissed. You sucked the joy from every room. You were never meant to be born. Liriel flinched. The words stung, not because they were new but because they were old. Wounds scabbed over but never healed. She stepped forward. You feared what you couldn't understand, Liriel said, her voice low but steady. I was never your curse. I was your mirror. The illusion cracked. Marla's face splintered like glass, her form folding in on itself. The arch behind her dimmed. The next memory came before she could draw breath. A ring of villagers, their faces twisted in judgment. The baker's wife. The woodcutter. Children clutching their mother's skirts. They spoke not with words but with silence. That silence was louder than screams. Liriel stepped among them, surrounded, suffocated. Her heart pounded. Their silence pressed against her skull, a vacuum that made her want to scream her own name, to force it into their mouths. But she didn't. Instead, she spoke softly. You were afraid. And in your fear you chose cruelty. But I will not carry that silence any longer. The silence broke. The villagers' forms unraveled into vapor. Another arch. She walked through it into the memory of the well itself, not the one above, moss-covered and cold, but a version magnified, monstrous. Its stones rose like teeth, its depths gaped like a mouth ready to consume. The wind howled in a language she had heard only in nightmares. This was the well not as she had seen it, but as the village had made it, a place of punishment, of fear, of forgetting. And suddenly she was falling again. Falling. Falling. She landed hard on a stone floor, gasping, and saw herself as a child, no more than 5, curled in the cellar corner, weeping silently. Alone. Unseen. Unnamed. It broke something in her, not in grief but in recognition. She approached the child version of herself and knelt. I know you, she whispered. I remember you. She reached out and touched the child's cheek. The small girl looked up with eyes full of ache. You weren't weak. You survived. The child's form began to glow, softly, tentatively, and then dissolved into light, like a candle given back to the flame. Liriel stood. More visions tried to rise, her stepmother again screaming this time, the crowd chanting her doom, her own face twisted in rage, but she did not fight them. She faced each. She named each pain, abandonment, betrayal, erasure, fear. And then she did something harder. She forgave them. Not because they deserved it but because she deserved freedom. Forgiveness was not surrender. It was release, not letting them go but letting herself go. And with that final act, the arches around her crumbled. Light poured in from every direction, not searing, not blinding but warm. Familiar. Alive. The darkness fled. The hall vanished. She stood once more in the water, the true water, the sacred water of below, and the spirits reappeared around her, watching in silence, their eyes gleaming with pride. You have passed through, said Mirvine. You named what others buried, said Elsha. You are ready, whispered Merit. And from the deep, a voice not heard since the dawn of memory rose like a tide. Liriel, daughter of the well, bearer of voices, it is time. She closed her eyes. And above her the water stirred. 7 nights had passed since Liriel was cast into the well. 7 nights of uneasy quiet in Duskwind Hollow, the kind of quiet that presses against the chest, that lives beneath the floorboards, that waits. The villagers moved like shadows through their days, avoiding the square, speaking in clipped tones. No one dared pass by the well after sundown. Even the bravest men walked faster near its fence, eyes averted, breath held. But on the 7th night something changed. The air grew thick and charged, heavy with expectation. Clouds swirled above the hollow, not gray but ink-dark, the color of storm before it breaks. The wind stilled. The trees in the gloaming wood stood rigid, their leaves motionless. Not a single bird called. Then at the stroke of midnight the bell in the ruined chapel rang. Once, twice, 12 times. Though its clapper had long fallen, though no hand had touched its rusted ropes in years, still it tolled, solemn and deep as though from beneath the earth itself. And as the final note faded into the hills, the well began to glow. It started faintly, a bluish pulse at its base, hidden from view. Then the stones themselves began to shimmer, veins of soft silver light spreading across the moss-covered walls like cracks in time. Mist spilled upward from the mouth of the well, thick and luminous, coiling through the iron fence and crawling over the cobblestones of the square. The villagers awoke, each from a dream they could not remember, each with the same name on their lips. Liriel? It was a whisper carried on the wind, breathed through shutters and keyholes, drifting through rafters and chimneys. Children stirred in their sleep. Elders sat upright in their beds. Marla, alone in her cottage, clutched her throat, cold sweat blooming across her skin. The well began to sing. Not with melody but with vibration, a low hum that set teeth on edge and floors trembling. The glow grew brighter. The mist thickened. And then, the water rose. Not in a flood. Not in chaos. But in a graceful, impossible column. A pillar of silver-blue liquid lifting upward from the depths like a tower of light. It shimmered, suspended in the air, and at its heart, something moved. Someone. Liriel. She rose within the water like a star returning to the sky, arms at her sides, hair fanned like a halo, her skin lit from within. She was dressed not in rags, but in flowing garments woven from the shimmer of water and light, as though the well itself had clothed her. Her eyes opened, no longer dim with fear or sorrow, but bright with knowing. She stepped out from the column and onto the stones of the square. The water did not fall. It simply vanished, folding back into the mouth of the well with a sigh, as though exhaling. The mist parted before her. And across the village, doors creaked open. Lanterns flared. People stepped into the square, hesitantly, reverently, drawn not by fear but by awe. No one spoke. They could not. Because what stood before them was not just the girl they had cast into the dark. It was something more. Her presence was no longer small. She seemed taller, though her body had not changed. The air around her shimmered faintly, as if space itself bent in her presence. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft, but carried effortlessly across the square. You threw me away. You called me nameless. You called me cursed. But I am the water you feared. The name you buried. I am Leone, and I remember everything. Some dropped to their knees. Others wept, wordless, broken open by the weight of her voice. And then, as if punctuating her return, the sky split. A single thunderclap cracked through the air, shaking the ground. Rain began to fall, slow, warm, clean. The kind of rain that does not drown but blesses. The well pulsed once more, then stilled. Balance, after centuries, had returned. And Leone stood at the center of it all, radiant, reborn, and no longer alone. The rain fell gently on the village square, washing away the silence that had ruled Duskwind Hollow for generations. The villagers stood motionless, their faces pale and glistening. The night air shimmered with something older than fear, deeper than awe. It was reckoning. Leone remained at the center of the square, calm as the eye of a storm that had already passed. Her bare feet touched the wet stone without sound. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone was a tide the people could not resist. And still she cursed no one. She did not scream. She did not demand blood. Instead she spoke. The well did not take me. You did. The water did not fear me. You did. You gave me no name. But I found it. Her words flowed like a river, clear, unstoppable, ancient. The sound of her voice, now resonant with something beyond human breath, moved through the crowd not as accusation but as mirror. Every face turned toward her saw a reflection of the harm they had ignored, the fear they had fed. Behind the crowd, a sudden shriek split the air. Marla. She had watched from the edge of the square, hidden by shadow, but now the fear inside her boiled over. With trembling hands she turned and fled through the alleyways, skirts trailing, her breath ragged. But Leone did not chase her. Let her run, she said softly. What haunts her now is not me. It is the truth. The villagers murmured among themselves, their unity unraveling. Some backed away, shame burning into their cheeks. Others fell to their knees, weeping. A few, those with the clearest memories, those who had once been kind but silent, stepped forward. An old man with a twisted cane knelt before her, head bowed. We were wrong, he whispered. We were so wrong. A young woman, the baker's daughter, reached out, hesitant. You dreamed alone, she said. And we let you. Leone nodded, not with approval but with understanding. She placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. Truth is not vengeance, she said. But it does not forget. The well behind her hummed softly, like a heart finally beating in rhythm. Others came forward, not all but enough. They did not ask for absolution. They did not expect it. But they came, and in coming they changed. The square did not become a place of punishment that night. It became a place of reckoning, and beginning. Leone, the girl once nameless, had returned not to destroy the village, but to remind it that silence is not innocence, and forgetting is not healing. As the rain soaked the earth and the thunder rolled into the distance, something ancient broke, not violently but completely. And in its place truth remained. The storm passed, and with it, the long shadow that had hung over Duskwind Hollow. The rain cleansed the streets and softened the earth. It lingered for days, not as a flood but as a gentle hush, coaxing seeds to bloom and leaves to unfurl. The air changed and so did the people. They began to speak in quieter tones, to pause longer before judgment. They passed by the square not with fear but with reverence. The well, once a place of dread, now shimmered softly with a light that did not fade. And Leone remained. She did not return to any cottage, not to Marla's abandoned home, nor to the edge of the woods. She stayed by the well itself as though she had always belonged to it. A shelter was built nearby, simple and open to the wind, and there she made her home. People began to leave gifts there. Lanterns, flowers, folded paper birds. They never saw her take them, but the offerings always vanished by dawn. Children were the first to return without fear. They tiptoed to the square in small groups, clutching each other's hands, daring one another to speak aloud the name they had once heard whispered in the night. Leone. The name no longer sounded like a ghost sigh. Felt like a song. They sang it as they played, skipping games and circle dances, verses half remembered and half invented. Their songs carried through the fields and forests, echoing in tones that the land had not known in decades. And at night, they dreamed of glowing trees and silver fish and girls who lived in the water but laughed like the wind. From time to time one would see her, just a glimpse. A shape in the mist or a figure standing by the well as moonlight turned the water glassy. She would smile, always gently, and then vanish again. She was no longer just a girl. She was something else now. A keeper. A guardian. A name that would not be forgotten. The villagers, uncertain how to face her directly, began to treat the well as holy ground. It was cleaned regularly now, its stones scrubbed and offerings placed on its rim. During the spring and harvest festivals, wreaths were laid around it in a circle, and the youngest child in the village would be chosen to toss petals into its waters. They never said it aloud, but they all knew, this was not mere ceremony. It was penance. Leone never asked for worship, nor did she offer sermons. But when someone came with truth in their heart, to speak what had been buried, or to weep for what had been done, the well would ripple and the mist would part just enough for them to feel her presence. And in that presence many found peace. Each year, on the 7th night after the last spring frost, the sky would darken at midnight and the bell in the ruined chapel would ring again, 12 times. No hand pulled its rope. No wind moved its tower. And each time the villagers would gather in the square, not out of fear but to listen. Because that was the night when the spirits returned. They came not in terror or vengeance but in light. Figures of silver and shadow, daughters once forgotten, now remembered. They glided along the mist, brushing hands against old stones, pausing by the hearts that had once burned too cold. And at the center of it all stood Leone, aglow as she had been that first night, but now utterly at ease in her power. The spirits would dance around the well and the children would sing. It became a night of beauty, of truth, of reckoning and renewal. Some said the well sang louder that night, not with grief but with joy. Over time, travelers from beyond Duskwind Hollow came to hear the tale. They arrived with questions, with disbelief, with stories of their own. And Leone listened to them all. She never spoke often, she had once been silenced too long to waste words. But when she did speak, people listened. It was said her voice could still the wind. Ballads were written. Some grand and embroidered, others simple and raw. She appeared in the stitched corners of quilts and the carvings on walking sticks. In one village far to the east, a charm known as the Well-Keeper's Tear was worn to protect children from being lost. And always the name endured. Leone. The girl once called Wretch. The voice the well remembered. The name whispered at midnight. Marla was never seen again. Some claimed she wandered into the gloaming wood and was taken by the old things that lived beneath the roots. Others whispered she fled north, cursed to see water shimmer with ghost light every time she neared it. Leone never spoke of her. Some wounds do not need retelling. But others do. And so Leone remained, not as a queen or spirit or goddess, but as keeper of memory, of truth, of the voices that had been lost and the names that had been buried. The well never spoke again as it had that night, not with thunder or light, but sometimes when the moon was high and the square silent, you could hear it hum. A low, steady tone. As though it remembered. And those who had once feared the well now taught their children differently. Respect the water, they would say. And never forget the girl it named. In time Leone became legend. But in Duskwind Hollow she was never forgotten. Even after her face faded from memory, even after her name became part of rhyme and story, the well stood, quiet, waiting, listening. And every 7th spring the bell would toll at midnight. The mist would rise. And in the hush that followed, every soul in the village would close their eyes and hear the name that had once been lost, now eternal. Leone. The one who rose. The one who remembered. The one who was left to die. But whom the water called home. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting long shadows on the walls of the cottage. Outside, the wind moaned softly across the moor, winding through crooked trees and low stone fences, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild thyme. Inside, in the warmth of the firelight, a circle of children sat on a thick, worn rug. Their cheeks were flushed from the cold, their eyes wide with sleep and story hunger. In the rocking chair near the fire sat the old woman, skin like bark, hair like milkweed. She held a steaming mug between her hands, but had long stopped drinking. Her eyes were not looking at the children. They were fixed on something only she could see, something just beyond the firelight. One of the children, the youngest, a girl with a missing tooth and hair in braids, tugged at the old woman's shawl. "Gran," she whispered, "tell the well story." The other children stilled. Even the boy who had been pulling the cat's tail froze. The old woman turned slowly as though waking from a dream. A thin smile touched her lips. "The well story," she said softly, like a secret too old to say loud. "I." She leaned forward and the fire caught in her eyes. She was left to die in the well, but the water spoke her name at midnight. A ripple ran through the children. A few drew their blankets closer. Others leaned in, drawn by the gravity of the words, the same way wind leans toward a storm. The old woman began to rock, slow and steady, the rhythm of memory. "Long ago, before you or I were born, before even the stones in this hearth were set, there was a village called Duskwind Hollow, a place much like this one. Quiet, cold, close to the woods and closer still to secrets. And in the center of that village was a well. Deep and dark and older than any map or prayer. Folks said it was cursed, that it whispered at night, that it had taken girls." She paused. But no one listened to whispers. Not until the water rose. The children were silent, breath held, eyes wide. The old woman went on, her voice low and certain. "They say a girl lived there, nameless and small. They called her wretch or girl, but she had a name, though no one knew it, not even her. She lived with a stepmother whose heart had long since frozen. A woman who feared what she could not understand. And when strange things began to happen, dreams of water, voices in the night, that stepmother pointed her finger and cried, 'Witch.' The villagers believed her. Fear is a hungry thing." Her rocking slowed, the firelight flickering in her silver hair. "They took the girl to the well on a stormy night. No one spoke. No one stopped it. They threw her in, and left her to die." The flames popped and one of the children gasped. But the old woman's voice was steady as stone. "But the girl did not die. The water knew her. The well remembered. And beneath the surface was another world, where lost girls whispered and the forgotten waited. They gave her back her name, Liriel. And the water gave her back her life." She leaned forward, her hands resting on her knees. On the 7th night, at the stroke of midnight, the well glowed like a lantern. The water rose like a tower of glass. And from it stepped the girl they had cast away. She did not burn the village. She did not curse them. She spoke, and for the first time they listened. She became the keeper of the well. The guardian of the forgotten. The one who remembers the names others try to bury. She nodded slowly, as though affirming a truth that time itself had written. Even now, when the moon is full and the night too quiet, some say you can hear her name in the mist. And if a girl goes missing or a child cries alone by a stream, Liriel walks with them. She finds the lost. The room fell into silence. The fire sank into coals. A log shifted with a whispering crack. Finally, a boy with wide shoulders and soft eyes asked, "Is it true?" The old woman did not answer at first. She looked into the fire, into the past, into something deeper than either. Then she smiled just slightly. "Aye," she said. "It's as true as anything the bones remember. And truer than most things we speak by daylight." She stood, joints cracking, and moved to the mantel. There, sitting among the dried herbs and dusty candle stubs, was a small carved figure, of a girl in flowing robes, holding water cupped in her hands. She placed it in the center of the circle. The children looked at it with reverence. "Keep her story," the old woman said, her voice soft but unshakable. "Speak her name. Not in fear but in strength. Because there will always be wells, and always those who throw others in. But there will also be Liriel. And she listens. Still." Outside the wind rose. It slipped through the cracks in the shutters and curled around the corners of the cottage. And if you listened closely, very closely, you could hear something within it. Not a scream. Not a sob. A name. Soft, clear. Carried like a blessing. "Liriel." The old woman sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. The fire whispered low. And the story, like the water, flowed on.